Hello Year 9, it's Mrs. Kahoot here. Welcome to your first GCSE P lesson. So we're starting with the basics. I think these first two topics we're going to look at, skeletal system and muscular system, are really good and really interesting, very scientific. You might have come across some of this information before. For those of you that haven't, it will be something new. So in your fact book, you will see that facts you've got to learn this week are the 5 functions of the skeleton, and you need to be able to label all the skeletal bones. There are more than the ones you're going to learn today. There's 206 bones in your body, in fact, but you don't need to learn all 206. The ones that we're going to go through today are ones you definitely need to know. And in terms of when it comes to doing your exam in year 11, it will be things like labelling certain bones. So in your exam you might be given a diagram and asked to be able to name the scientific bone, and you might get questions about the function of the skeletal system, how the skeletal system allows us to get on with our day-to-day lives. So let's get started. If my PowerPoint wants to cooperate, it's just been a little bit slow, guys. I've got a really slow computer, which is irritating. Hopefully it's going to work. There we go. So the adult skeleton has 206 bones, and we're talking about a framework. So you'll see the picture on here. I'm sure you've all seen a picture of a skeleton before. You're going to need to know some key ones that are mainly associated with movement. So really important to know, because obviously everything we do, everything we learn about, we always need to link it back to sport. So here on the PowerPoint, we're going in a little bit of a backwards order. So I think your first fact to remember is the functions, but I'm going to do the bones to label first and the functions will come at the end, just because that's how this PowerPoint is set out, and I'm not going to create more work for myself, if I'm honest. So these are the bones you need to label. I'll go through them so you know the correct way to pronounce them. I'll show you where they are found, and then we'll look at functions. So the rib cage, femur, phalanges, good one I know, very funny, tibia, humerus, clavicle, scapula, cranium, fibula, carpals, metatarsals, radius, patella, sternum, vertebrae, pelvis, phalanges, tarsals, metacarpals, and ulna. You'll also find them listed in your fact book. Now we're going to move on and we're going to look at where you would find those bones on a skeleton so that you would be able to label them. So we're going to start at the top. We've got a backwards view here of our skeleton, and we've also got a front view here. So starting at the top is your cranium. You can see it from the back and from the front. Now your cranium is otherwise known as your skull. Going along your back, which is providing the main support of your skeleton, is your vertebral column, otherwise known as your spine. And obviously you can see it on the front view. It comes through along the back, and then you can see it here out past the rib cage. Moving down then, shoulder joint. So this sort of plate here that you will see is your scapula. Now some of you, if you pull your arm back, it almost creates like a bit of a chicken wing. It might stick out a little bit on you. So that's your scapula, protects your shoulder joint. And then the bone in your top of your arm is called your humerus. Now the way I remember where this bone is, if you hit your elbow or bang your elbow on something, that is your funny bone. People say, oh, you've hit my funny bone. Another word for funny, if someone's funny, they might have a lot of humour, they've got a good sense of humour, humerus. So that might be a way that you remember it. So it's that long bone in the top of your arm. And then here, some of you might have broken this before actually. So just running along the top, connecting into your shoulder joint here, you have got your clavicle, otherwise known as your collarbone. Moving down then into the chest region, you've got your rib cage. Now your rib cage performs a vital function of the skeleton. It protects your lungs and your heart and some other vital organs within your body. So it forms a cage, and it's obviously made up of loads of smaller bones. Sternum then, so it comes down the middle of your chest, otherwise known as your breastbone, whether you're male or female. And again, that just allows the rib cage to connect in from your vertebral column. Moving down then, we've got just re-highlighting the humerus for you at the top of the arm. And then we've got some arms in the bones in the bottom of the arm. And as you can see on the diagram, there's actually 2 bones in the bottom of your arm that join into your elbow joint. One is called the radius and one is called the ulna. Now, if we're looking at an anatomical skeleton, so that's what it means when the skeleton is in this position, so facing forward with the hands turned out, away from them, so in this kind of perfect position to be able to see it. The way I remember it is if you're looking at a diagram like this, the ulna is the bone that is underneath, so U for under, U for ulna, and the bone that is on the top is called your radius. Moving down onto the hips then, so the hip joint is actually split into loads of different bones within this area, but the main thing you need to learn it as is your pelvis. Here connecting into your pelvis, you have got one of the biggest bone in your body is your femur. Now, this is going to sound really silly and everyone sort of laughs at me, and I do like to make a fool of myself in lessons, so I might as well do it online as well. The way I remember femur, because it's the biggest bone in your body, I think big, I think giant, I think femur, I think fee, fi, fo, femur. So that might help you remember. A giant might say fee, fi, fo, femur, giant bone in your body, biggest bone in your body, thigh bone, femur. I don't know. Sometimes it helps with so many different pieces of scientific fact to remember in GCSE PE, because there is a lot, I'll warn you now. It might help sometimes to make up like little silly acronyms for things. If you don't know what an acronym is, it's a way of remembering something. And like I said, you've got your pelvis, which forms your hip. Again, like I said, made up of loads of other bones, but the main thing you need to know is that it's your pelvis. Right, in your knee you do actually have a bone that protects your knee joint, and that is called your patella. So that's otherwise known as your kneecap, your patella. In your bottom of your leg then, you've got 2 bones as well, just like in the bottom of your arm. On the top, if we look at this diagram, you've got your tibia, and underneath you have, oh, it's not done that. So underneath you have your fibula. It'll come up on the diagram in a minute. They are different. So it's not tibia and fibia, it's tibia and fibula. Now tibia, the way I remember it, if you look at the diagram, T for tibia, T for on top. So the bone that appears to be on top in this diagram is your tibia. Moving down then, ankle joint. So here you go, it's labelled the fibula for you now. So that thin bone that just sits behind is your fibula. And then if we look at our ankle joint, it's made up of 3 parts. So we've got the actual ankle joint itself. No, it's not actually labelled it, which is really annoying. So it hasn't labelled it, so I'm going to have to do this manually. So here you have got your tarsals, then your actual bones within your foot that sit on top of your foot are your metatarsals, sorry, and then here your toes, so the bones in your toes are called your phalanges. Now the bones in your toes and the bones in your finger have the same name. So toes and fingers are known as phalanges. You'll see that on your fact book. And then in a similar way to tarsals and metatarsals, so tarsals being the ankle bone, metatarsals being the foot bones, in your hand you have got carpals, you just look at my little arrow, which form your wrist bones, and you have got metacarpals that form your hand. Okay, so it goes carpals, metacarpals, phalanges, tarsals, metatarsals, phalanges. So the bones in your hands and your fingers. Okay, just take a minute to go over that. I'll just quickly flick back through it before we move on to functions. Now, a really, really good way to learn this is when you get up in the morning. It's going to sound really silly, and I do make you do silly things, but when you get up in the morning, if you look in the mirror, and as you're getting dressed, as you're pulling your t-shirt over your head, or you're washing your hair, or you're putting on some jewellery, or putting on your socks, or your trainers, or whatever it is, just as you're going through your morning routine, as you put things on, as you move your body, try and think to yourself, all right, I'm moving my clavicle, I'm moving my pelvis, I'm putting this t-shirt over my cranium, down over my scapula, things like that. Just trying to use these words in everyday life will just make them become second nature to you, and you run the less risk of getting them wrong. Now, they're only going to be worth 1 mark questions, but if you don't know them, it makes it harder to answer the bigger mark questions. So just quickly going back, I'll just go through and you can see. If you need to go back through this video and pause anything, then you can do. Okay, moving on to functions then. So functions, the word function, if you don't already know, is just another word for job. What's its job? What's its role? What's the point of it? Why do we have it? And you need to know these. You need to know these 5 functions. You need to be able to tell me how they do that. So number 1, support. The skeleton supports the muscles. So we don't just have a skeleton, we have muscles, which we're going to look at in lesson 2, that attach to the skeleton. And these muscles are going to contract and relax to pull on the bones to allow movement to happen. So they work together to allow us to move, but they also work together to provide us with support. You know, think about that vertebral column that supports our body upright. Our neck supports our cranium, our head, which is actually quite heavy. Protection then. So we talked about this a little bit when I talked about the rib cage. So the skeleton protects delicate parts of the body. Now I've talked about rib cage protecting the heart and lungs. Can you think of another bone that we've looked at today that would perform a protection function? Just give you about 30 seconds to have a little think. Think back. Have a look maybe in your fact book at the names of those bones and where they are. Can you think of one that performs another protection function other than the rib cage? Okay, if you said cranium, ding, 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 you are correct. So the cranium is your skull, and that is going to protect those big, juicy brains of yours. So keep them really safe, especially when you're doing sports. So, for example, your cranium is going to protect your brain in a rugby scrum. Yeah, your rib cage protects your heart and lungs if you are taking part in martial arts and you take a hit. Moving on, movement then. So I talked about this a little bit when we talked about support. Muscles are attached to bone and once contracting allow movement. So muscles are attached to bone via something called tendons, which we will look at when we look at muscular system. And basically those muscles contract and relax, so get longer and shorter, which works like a pulley system to move the bones. Mineral storage then. This is a really interesting one, I think. It's just amazing actually sometimes when you start looking at biology and things, that how amazing our bodies really are. So in your bone stores minerals such as calcium and phosphorus, and that allows your bones to be strong basically. Keep them nice and dense, so another word for dense is thick. So keep them thick, nice and dense, nice and strong, which is gonna reduce your risk of getting injured. Yeah, reduce the risk of them being broken. So mineral storage that happens in your bones. Posture then, so another word for posture, structure, things like that. The skeleton gives us our shape, size, helps us remain upright. Again, links to your vertebrae. And then red blood cell production. So if you don't know, red blood cells carry oxygen around the body. They're actually made in our bone marrow. So inside your bone is something called bone marrow, sort of a spongy tissue, a lot softer than the outer bit of the bone, which is obviously really hard. And within there, loads of red blood cells are produced, which obviously keep us functioning because we need oxygen to survive. That is functions of the skeleton in a nutshell, to be honest. I'll just quickly go through. So support, ligaments hold the skeleton together, so connect them all here. You can see a ligament here, a tendon and a ligament here. This is the muscle that's attached to the bone. And protection, so the cranium, reduce your chance of injury, very important. Muscles pull on the bones like levers. Posture and shape, it's really important. Keep our body shape. We don't want to just be a pile of bones or a big jelly mass. Mineral storage. And obviously the bones store it and then allow it to be released into your bloodstream when your body needs it. Keeps them nice and strong and dense. Another word for dense is thick, remember. And then blood cell production. In the longer bones is where red blood cell production takes place, so especially in that femur, that big long giant bone in your thigh. And then that's joints, which we're not actually looking at today. So that sums everything up in a nutshell. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you need any support with learning the facts or the task, which I do believe your task is to play a little game, see how quickly you can memorize them. Maybe your parents or whoever's at home shout out a name and you've got to give the correct name of the bone. Maybe you try and label them up like a living model with post-it notes, or create like a big skeleton poster with